Hi everyone, this is Colleen, and this is Friday, July 22nd, 2016, and this is Haggie Reads for you on Haggie Shack Radio at haggieshack.com, simulcast to Wolf Spirit Radio. And today I thought I'd pick up where I left off last time, which was about 2 weeks ago, with The Children of the Law of One, The Lost Teachings of Atlantis, by John Peniel. The Big Picture. Setting Your Ideal. We have already covered this somewhat in another chapter, but it is a very important concept that is also pertinent here. An ideal is the encapsulation of the end result of all our goals, of everything you ultimately want to be, and most importantly, a way of being, all wrapped up in one symbolic concept. If the greatest thing you can achieve is universal consciousness, then the greatest ideal would be one of the universally conscious beings. Since your ideal is a way for you to be, it can be set in one concept of being, such as that exemplified in the lives of any of the enlightened ones, past or present. Choose whatever you are most familiar with or drawn to, Jesus, Buddha, Black Elk, or whomever. If you have a true teacher, that is the optimal choice. We have already discussed what you think and do radically changes everything in your life. When you establish an ideal and keep it in your conscious mind, it can have a powerful effect on your life. But this effect is only as strong as your application of the ideal in your life. So consider who or what is the ultimate you would have in your life and in the lives of others. Once you determine your ideal, then close your eyes, meditate on it, contemplate it. Feel and completely visualize being like your ideal, as if it were indeed real. This is one way to set your ideal. Getting the conscious and subconscious in sync. For everything to be really effective, including goal achievement, self-discipline, or ideals, the conscious and subconscious minds must work together. Many times a person makes major conscious mind decisions, but the programming of the subconscious mind is in conflict with those, and keeps working at counter purposes to the conscious goal. Since so much of what we think and do comes from the subconscious, this can totally nullify your conscious desires, and in fact, make things happen that are opposite to what you want. Properly setting your ideal will have an effect on both the conscious and subconscious realms of your being. For instance, a person may have decided they want a successful career, and they do all the right conscious things to make it happen. They get the training, apply for work, etc. But if the subconscious is programmed for failure, the person will do things that counteract or defeat the conscious goal. They may be stupid little things like the slip of a word at the wrong time, or being late for an appointment, or even little physical screw-ups. It can defeat you in many ways. Programming your ideal. To get your ideal programmed into the subconscious, use the tools of affirmation, complete visualization, meditation, and if available, the Atlantean vibrational sounds. Once an ideal is fully programmed into the subconscious will work towards achieving it. This doesn't mean that you can sit back and let the subconscious do all the work for you. You must still consciously apply your ideal in all situations. Concentration and self-discipline comes into play again. When you have set your ideal, check up on yourself by keeping a list of your daily activities and reviewing them daily to see how you are doing with living up to your ideal. Summary. Remember, if you have no ideal, you are like a piece of driftwood being tossed about by the tides of external forces, or one of those toys that moves on the floor in a random direction until it runs into something, upon which it turns around and moves in another direction until it runs into something else, etc., etc. If you have an ideal, but it's not in harmony with universal will, then your life is but a temporary illusion, and rewards of which are empty and negative. Only an ideal that is in harmony with the eternal universal flow brings lasting peace and fulfillment. Whatever your ideal is, self-discipline, consistency, and perseverance are determining factors in whether the manifestation of your ideal is great, has little effect, or fails to manifest altogether. Look at those who have excelled in their chosen directions. How do they do it? They have very definite goals, and they work at it consistently. Mikhail's favorite quote from the I Ching was always, "Perseverance furthers." If someone else can do it, so can you. And what better reason could you have to exercise strict self-discipline and consistency than for the goal of being a channel for the manifestation of the universal spirit? Chapter 18. Patience, humility, faith, and trust. Believe not what you read or hear. Have faith only when you know. Experience oneness with the universal spirit. Only then will true faith be yours. Unselfish love, kindness, harmlessness, these things you can believe in. Trust only the universal spirit. Know that all things are right for those who do the will of God. Exercise the qualities of unselfish love, patience, and humility, and the virtues of unselfish love, kindness, harmlessness, and compassion. Faith. Father, when I was young, I was told that faith was one of the most important things to have, and that I should have faith in God. Even the texts say something about Jesus saying, if you had the faith of a mustard seed, you could move mountains. Yes, but mustard seeds have a great deal of faith, and one should not seek to compare oneself to the great mustard seed. I'm serious. Be serious for a moment, will you? Oh, yes, you are serious. I thought you were penile. Okay. Then I was taught, ask and you shall receive. But when I prayed, my prayers weren't answered. You know the old punchline to that. You got answered, but the answer was just no. Yeah, I was told that. But then, why do they say you will receive? Then they give me answers like, that only applies to certain things, or that I didn't have enough faith. One time, when I was in a great deal of pain, I just prayed for it to go away, and it wouldn't. I started wondering what kind of God would stop my pain, and that led me to thinking about all the suffering in the world, and eventually led me to becoming an atheist. But you aren't an atheist now. And do you have faith? Faith in what? I know there's something, but I don't know what it is. I mean, I don't really know. You will someday, Penile. That's what you've been working for. It is a premise of the ancient teachings that faith should not be blind. You were asked to have blind faith by those in your past. Your faith was based on believing in something you didn't know, so your faith was really nothing. We also teach that you should not have faith just because someone tells you that you should, or that you should believe something, or programs your mind to believe something. Also, just because something is written in a book doesn't make it true or real, and this should not be the basis of faith either. Too many people think just because it's written, it is so, including the ancient texts and teachings. Definitely including them. They are but paper, leather, stone, words, ideas. And they are all for the interpretation by the limited intellectual brains of people in this limited physical life. Instead, the children promote direct experience that will result in faith. To put it into one statement, experience oneness, God, first, then have faith. Then you will have true faith naturally. In that sense, when I think about it, I guess I do have faith that God exists, because I have directly experienced, at least touched, the universal consciousness for a moment. So at least I know it exists, and still have faith that something exists that is far more immense. As we said before, when you are out of the physical body and away from its limitations of consciousness, you can have a greater understanding and knowledge of things than you can when your consciousness is locked into the physical. This doesn't mean you have to die. It can be experienced during deep meditation or an out-of-body experience. In such a high state of consciousness, you can experience oneness. But when you come down to your normal state of consciousness, you don't retain the direct knowledge or experience. Once you have touched and experienced these higher levels of universal consciousness, though, you can have a knowingness of what you experienced. At that point, even though you no longer directly experience total oneness with all, you know that such exists, and you know that there is more than you are aware of. This is when it is appropriate to have such faith. That is what you have. But there is much more when you finally do have a death experience and achieve enlightenment. When you become part of it and it stays with you. Once you know yourself that there is a God and a saintly hierarchy, a force that flows and interweaves with all things, and you can guide all things, and you are guided in part of it all, then you can have true, total faith, even when you aren't directly in touch with knowing what is behind the scenes. You will be able to have faith that as long as you are surrendered to God and the universal will and flow, whatever happens will be right. I can't wait. Yes, you can, but you don't have to, yet you do. And the sound of one hand clapping? Ask Yuri. He only has one. I will tell him you said that and ask to hear it. Enough of the Zen for now. Getting back to the point. Until you have such an experience, there is one other thing you can have faith in, unselfish love and its virtues. You can have faith that caring, kindness, harmlessness, compassion are good things. Even though without universal consciousness to guide your decisions, these virtues can lead you to make mistakes. They are still far better to have than not. Trust. The ancient teachings say that because of the darkness that pervades most everything and everyone here on the earth plane, you should trust nothing and no one. only the universal spirit and those with universal consciousness. This is a paradox. Because if you are in the flow of universal will, and you understand the universal spirit, you know you can trust that whatever happens is perfect in a certain way. Thus, you can trust everything and everyone, while trusting nothing and no one. Talk about Zen! Whew! Attributes of unselfish love. Patience and humility are virtues, but applied to spiritual growth, they are more than that. They are attitudes of letting go, surrendering to the universal flow. They are attributes of unselfish love. Patience. Michael had this to say about it. Patience is usually associated with waiting. But patience as a spiritual attitude does not mean a state of standing still or passive waiting, but rather an active waiting, waiting to see what will come while you are submitting to universal will. For submission to the universal will brings subsequent manifestations of the universal spirit. Heavenly bodies exemplify this kind of patience, and so does nature. From the I Ching, hexagram 5, waiting. All beings have need of nourishment from above, but the gift of food comes in its own time, and for this one must wait. This hexagram shows the clouds in the heavens, giving rain to refresh all that grows, and to provide mankind with food and drink. The rain will come of its own time. We cannot make it come. We have to wait for it. The idea of waiting is further suggested by the attributes of the two trigrams, strength within, danger in front. Strength in the face of danger does not plunge ahead, but bides its time, whereas weakness in the face of danger grows agitated and has not the patience to wait. From Stranger in a Strange Land. Waiting is, from the Bible, be still and know that I am God. Michael had more to say, which echoed my earlier problems with concentration during meditation. Patience is very pertinent to self-discipline and meditation. Almost always, a person who begins to meditate will get frustrated. The separate self rebels against the attempt to transcend it, and it will shift the mind into higher gear, jabbering away, and doing everything it can to distract the concentration. Furthermore, getting impatient with oneself because of a failing of self-discipline of any kind gives the separate self just what it wants. Such frustration is accompanied by stopping the self-discipline and feeding of negative thoughts. That's how the separate self succeeds in distracting you and getting you off course. These are tricks the self is using against you, pulling at you with, and they can only be overcome by having the patience to be consistent and persevering. Instead of wasting time and giving energy to the separate self by getting upset with yourself, simply start your meditation again and start your self-discipline again. If you do this, you defeat its tricks and eventually win. Such patience pays off. From the I Ching, hexagram 52, keeping still, mountain. When a man has thus become calm, he may turn to the outside world. He no longer sees it in the struggle and tumult of individual beings, and therefore he has the true peace of mind which is needed for acting in harmony with them. Whoever acts from these deep levels makes no mistakes. Selfishness has created all our problems. Everyone desperately cries out for happiness. Tolerance, humility, and patience are things that make for happiness, yet most people avoid them. And few are willing to pay the price for happiness, transcending the separate self by living a life of unselfish love. It is simple cause and effect. The seed sown must one day be reaped. We disappointed others in the past. When we find ourselves being disappointed, we can learn patience. Patience gives us all of time and space to understand things. When we use our free will and mind to walk a path of spiritual growth, our return to oneness is accompanied by suffering. There's no way around it. We must endure this suffering with patience, understanding, and humility. The more humble we are, the more quickly and easily we will finally return to oneness. Humility. Humility is the opposite of being egotistical or self-centered. It is the way of true love, being receptive to God, surrendering to the universal spirit, the universal will, flowing and being in harmony with the universe. Humility is the most endearing and beautiful quality, but it is the most important quality you could ever have as a student or a true teacher serving God. In one of my early courses with Elder Raga, he tried to tell me something that I needed to hear very badly, but I didn't have ears to hear yet. To a person who lacks humility, appearing to be right is more important than actually being right, which might require admitting making a mistake in order to correct oneself so that they can actually be right. A person who is humble doesn't personally or selfishly care if they are right or wrong. They are just concerned with being right for the sake of helping others. Thus, they are more often right than wrong, and will more quickly correct any mistakes if they find that they're wrong. They also seek perfection in the service of God, and welcome the criticism of others so that they may correct mistakes that they have missed. Having the attention of others is also important to those who lack humility. Egoism, self-centeredness, pride, in the sense of being personally proud, and its close relative, vanity, are the opposite qualities of humility. The egotistical and self-centered person wants to control everything his or her way, and sees his or herself as the most important thing there is, and the person which all other things and all other beings revolve around. The prideful person wants credit for their accomplishment. The humble person attributes all of their success, capabilities, and accomplishments to simple facts of reality, or God working through them, rather than to their own prideful abilities. Then he looked directly at a new female novice who was fixing her hair while he spoke and said, "The person who gives importance to physical appearance also doesn't understand the beauty of humility." Michael was quite fond of this saying. Rather than the egotistical attitude of the separate self, which is one of being a great mountain, humility is having an attitude of being a receptive little valley. Nature wears down the great mountain and fills the valley with rich topsoil, lakes, and abundance. Thus, a person who is truly humble and in need cannot be passed by, and is made great by God. Zayn's favorite reference to the subject was, Nature abhors a vacuum. My old Zen archery teacher's favorite saying was, "A cup must be empty before it can be filled." A humble person who is not of their own self-centered thoughts and information is able to be filled with wisdom from the universal spirit. A person with a humble attitude learns very quickly, adapts to situations easily, and quickly flows with whatever changes are presented to them by life or people, and can communicate and relate to others better than anyone else. Why? Simply because they get out of their own way. They get their self out of the way of dealing with the rest of the world and reality. Thus, their separateness doesn't wall off their openness to others or anything in life, nature, or the universe. Rather than putting time and energy into themselves or defending themselves or their ideas, they keep an open mind and consider the input of others. They also don't wall off their own unselfish love and compassion for others. Often, students, like animals, will seek to establish a pecking order amongst other students. Everyone wants to consider themselves more evolved or higher than the other. Generally, the ones that are most concerned with this are the least humble and thus the least evolved. Jesus emphasized this at the Last Supper. Remember the earlier story? It was a custom to wash the dust off a guest's feet, but the apostles were all too important to lower themselves to wash the other's feet. So Jesus did it, shocking them, and driving home the important point of humility, reminding them that the greatest among you will be the servant to all. In the end, those who make it their priority to be number one will be the last, and those whose priority is to be humble will be number one and not care whether or not they are number one. Humility goes to the movies. Movies are such a powerful form of entertainment. Combining the elements of storytelling, acting, and music can touch and inspire people like nothing else. Below are some wonderful spiritual movies I would recommend for inspiration and understanding. If you can't find them locally, you can rent them through the mail or buy them. You may want to do that so you can see them more than once or show them to friends and family. Here are two companies that have most of the movies for rent and sale. Best Video, and it's 1-800-RARE-VID, RAREVID. Website is www.bestvideo.com, and Video Vault, 1-800-VAULT-66. Website www.videovault.com. And my input here is I did just check these links out on the internet, and they are still working. So, you can check those out there. Now, he recommends Groundhog Day with Bill Murray, excellent parable for reincarnation and learning to give and care about others. Kung Fu, the original old TV series and pilot movie, not the new series, Kung Fu, The Legend Continues. Lots of examples of humility in general, and the humble attitude a student monk must have to learn and grow. Lots of good spiritual lessons between a few Kung Fu fighting scenes. Lost Horizon, the story of a place called Shangri-La. There is an old black and white version directed by Frank Capra, It's a Wonderful Life, starring Ronald Colman, or a new color version starring Peter Finch, Michael York, Liv Ullmann, and it's a musical also with a Burt Bacharach soundtrack and score. Both versions are based on the James Hilton novel which mysteriously somewhat depicts our Shargung-La monastery and community. Then there's Brother Sun, Sister Moon, which I would like to talk about here. Brother Sun, Sister Moon was beautifully filmed by the famous Italian director Franco Zeffirelli of Romeo and Juliet, and has a soundtrack by Donovan. It is the story of Saint Francis of Assisi. It contains many examples of humility, but the scene where Claire expresses her realization of humility to Francis is one of the nicest examples. Francis has long ago left behind the normal world and lives a simple life as a beggar monk, serving God and attending the poor and infirm outside the city. Even though Claire is an exceptional person, and even prior to Francisco's, St. Francis's, changes, she cared for the lepers who were exiled from the town. She has not dedicated her life to serving others or to God. And while there was an obvious bond and attraction between Claire and Francis, and an appreciation of his changes and work, she nevertheless remained with her wealthy family in the city. One day she comes running through the fields, happily calling for Francis. When she finds him, she asks to be taken into his order, and essentially declares, "I don't want to be loved anymore, I want to love. I don't want to be understood any longer, I want to understand." This moment in the movie is an incredibly touching and beautiful expression of humility. Unfortunately, the enlightenment of St. Francis is one of those 1 in a billion events, and since he had no tradition to properly prepare or train him for it, and no true teacher, it left him confused and with many problems. Yet he was looked after to a great extent, and his enlightenment, his great love, and the broader perspective of life was undeniable, and a beautiful sight to behold. Strange Cargo with Clark Gable is a hardened, cynical criminal condemned to years in an old French swamp island-type prison. Suddenly encounters a new prisoner, a mysterious kind, Christ-like prisoner. He then escapes with other convicts and the Christ-like prisoner and comes to a personal crossroad in his path. He faces his karma, and at the most critical moments in his life, he ultimately chooses to lend his will to the good part of himself, and in doing so, he ultimately finds peace and the love of a good woman. Meet John Doe with Gary Cooper as a wonderful story about two things: the importance that the average person on the street can have, the John and Jane Does of the world, and how simple kindness, humility, and caring can make this world a virtual paradise. It also illustrates how the selfish, powerful, dark ones of this world do everything they can to prevent this. Very inspiring. Beyond Tomorrow. 3 lovable old men die in a plane crash, but remain on the earth plane as ghosts to watch over and help a good-hearted young couple. One of which is facing the dangers of getting sucked into the selfish, superficial, materialistic existence. It's an excellent parable of self-sacrifice and love. Doctor Strange, TV movie. Not made all that well, or truly, totally, to the incredible metaphysical stories it's based on, but it's still a great story of good against evil, humility, and how many things that are unseen by most do really go on in the world. Then The Circle of Iron, which is basically a martial arts movie with many Zen, humility, and other lessons. Star Wars, a classic parable of good versus evil, and the great fight between them on many different levels. Brother Orchid. Cute, wonderful movie with Edward G. Robinson as a tough guy gangster who goes to Europe trying to buy class. When he returns, his former second-in-command, Bogart, tries to kill him. Left for dead, monks from a local monastery who raise flowers help him recover. At first he just figures it's a good hideout, and approaches being a monk and working in the garden with the same scheming, selfish attitude that got him to the top of the gangster ladder. He eventually changes and discovers real class there. You Can't Take It With You, a Frank Capra film. Heartwarming story about a zany but extraordinarily kind and open-minded family who are thrown together with a powerful socialite family through the proposed marriage of their children. The results are both hilarious and fascinating. Resurrection. Ellen Bernstein. Great movie about a woman who has a near-death experience that changes her life in many ways and more than once. The Ten Commandments with Yul Brynner and Charlton Heston. This classic depicts the story of Moses. Even if you've already seen it, next time watch it with an eye toward ego and humility. Jesus Christ Superstar, a musical that may be a bit hokey and dated, but it's one of the best depictions of Jesus that we've seen. In order to really get the feeling for it, you have to listen to the lyrics of the songs. If you do that, you'll get a new insight into the being known as Jesus and his experiences, along with some really good lessons. Joseph. This movie beautifully illustrates the value of compassion and forgiveness. Joseph is put through many tests and trials through his kindness, honesty, and devotion to God. He overcomes them all. He had 12 brothers, like the 12 apostles, and in the end, he helped them in spite of their treachery towards him. His forgiveness and great love transformed the situation into one of love and unity. And the Rain Came. This takes place in India in the early 1900s. Mima Loy plays a dissatisfied, rich and superficial woman who is visiting there. Tyrone Powers plays a kind doctor. A huge rainstorm hits, and major floods wash over the land, killing many people. The special effects are quite good considering it's an old film. Next, a plague hits them and even more people are dying. One of the nicest things about this film is seeing Mima Loy evolve and become a caring person. She begins taking care of the sick and dies herself. Great soulmate movies. Since we're on the subject of movies, we may as well mention a few exceptional soulmate, spiritually romantic movies. Peter Ibbotson with Gary Cooper. After being separated from his soulmate as a child, Peter accidentally finds her as an adult. He unjustly ends up imprisoned for life, yet their mutual dreams bring them together every night, until they finally join together forever. Portrait of Jenny. A supposedly true story surrounding a painting bought by the filmmaker. A tale of a ghostly girl with a beautiful spirit, who appears at different ages as she grows up, crossing over different time zones to be with her soulmate. Her soulmate was a starving artist, whose only remarkable painting was his portrait of Jenny. Somewhere in Time, with Christopher Reeves and Jane Seymour. Wonderful story, in which he realizes his soulmate lived in an overlapping, earlier time period, in which he had already hypnotized himself to travel back in time to be with her. And so he does it again. Paradoxical and very romantic. Sticks and Stones. The opposite side of the coin to the I'll scratch your back if you'll scratch mine kind of love that most people have is the I won't scratch your back if you don't scratch mine polarity. Some people refuse to love or care about someone who doesn't love or care about them. Even people who have spiritually grown significantly and are generally more loving, compassionate, and caring to most people can shut down if someone dislikes them, or they even just think that someone doesn't care about them as much as they want them to, or expect them to. This is a sad and serious predicament, because most people don't love or care about others. So you'll have to scratch almost everyone you meet off your who to care about list. And if they never find anyone to care about them, how will they ever start caring about others? I had an elder student who was very aware and very compassionate ordinarily. But if someone didn't like her, disliked her, or disappointed her as far as their caring, she would stop loving, stop caring about that person. Her excuse was that she didn't want to be anyone's doormat. I guess only doormats unselfishly love. And only those who love others more than themselves will be one with universal spirit. Then I will be a doormat. Other people stop loving just because they are personally hurt, that the other person isn't loving as much as they could be, or aren't giving them love at all. I'm not talking about letting someone do something destructive to you or anyone else. I'm just talking about words here, or ego-insulting actions, or lack of love and caring from someone else, not physical harm. Sticks and stones can break your bones, and you should do something about them if possible. But words can never hurt the real you. Someone can only injure your ego, your selfish, separate self, not the real you. And if you're truly humble, there's no target for the arrows being slung by someone else's separate self. If you can be offended, how can you help someone else? People you want to help will sometimes deliberately try to offend you, just to defend their separate self. But when you are unselfishly loving, it doesn't matter what someone thinks about you or says about you. You see them as an upset child who needs love. You realize that the reason they're striking out at you is because they have problems that need healing and transcending, problems that need your love and help. Sure, it hurts. It can make you sad when someone you love doesn't love you, but not loving them isn't going to help you or them. Whereas continuing to love them even through your own pain just might. My piece of humble pie. You cannot really learn unless you're humble, period. You cannot grow unless you're humble, period. To be humiliated, which is often looked at as a bad thing, is a great goodness. Being appreciated, given attention to, glorified, praised, those are harmful to humility. Humiliation could be the greatest gift someone could give you. To be willing to be a fool, and to really see and admit mistakes and shortcomings, is what makes true greatness in anything. Like I mentioned earlier, when I was young and first discovered and went to the monastery, I was thrilled. But I was a very egotistical young man. My separate self was proud and strong. I thought I was great. I was sorely lacking in humility, and I didn't think there were really very much anyone else could teach me. This was all secretly, of course, inside me, subconsciously. As it is in many spiritual orders, it is tradition to take and be given a new name when one starts their new monastic life. I'd been bugging Zayn for a name for some time, and he seemed to avoid it. But finally he gave it to me. He recognized my monstrous ego and gave me an appropriate name. No, it wasn't Godzilla or Frankenstein. It was the name of a character from history. It was a very famous ruler and, depending on how you looked at it, a great and powerful leader. But this character was someone whose ego was so great that he thumbed his nose at God. I didn't know that at the time. Zayn told me to go to the library and look the person up, and that there were many rulers of the same name. He said that because they all had the same name and he couldn't tell me which one I had been, I would have to figure it out for myself, which one of them I was. Of course, I chose the one who sounded the greatest. But Zayn was trying to tell me something about myself when he gave me that name. His intent wasn't for me to go on an ego trip about having been this great ruler in a past life. It was for me to realize my ego, and the type of ego I had. But he knew there was no point in pointing it out to me. I wouldn't have listened. So I took it to be a great name, such as was my ego. My first year at the monastery presented many challenges to my ego, daily. Soon, the pressure on my separate self, ego, was seemingly unbearable. Everyone always seemed to be in my face, pointing out my faults and showing me ways to improve. How dare they? From a humble point of view, this is food for the famished, but from a selfish state of mind, it's like being force-fed the kinds of food that you hate. For someone who has an attitude that they don't really want to see any truth about themselves, it's a horrible nightmare. It means they don't really want to change, also. And as a consequence, I focused only on the insult of being corrected and the humiliation and destruction of self-esteem that came from my being told I was always falling short. I was focusing on the ego irritation rather than my spiritual growth. I began to consciously and subconsciously do things to create problems, ultimately resulting in my being asked to leave by a council of the inner circle. I put up an appropriate argument, but really hoped to leave deep inside. My selfish, separate self, my ego, had had enough, and I was letting it gain back lost ground. Upon my arrival back in my old life, I found it to be a breeze. Unbeknownst to me, even the little bit of forced ego transition I had gone through made the previous big problems in my life seem insignificant. Life was easier without some of my baggage. But slowly, I became snared in the web of my own selfishness again. It had only been 6 months, but like a cancer that wasn't completely eradicated, my ego grew back. The resultant problems in my life grew back, and the disease of my separate self overtook me. My life fell apart. My girlfriend left me. I wasn't even a legal adult yet, but it seemed like my life was over, disintegrating and miserable. It was all worse than ever. I became deathly ill, and on my deathbed I accidentally discovered what my real name really meant. I saw the historical character I was named after being played in a movie on TV as I lay in bed with a fever. It was God revealing it to me. What a monumental egoed-out jerk the guy was. The realization of my grand egotism hit me like a ton of bricks. I finally saw myself in all its bull glory. I called a Native American healer that I knew, and he helped me with my illness. I rapidly recovered and returned to my teacher. I couldn't communicate with Zayn as well as I would have liked. I was still a puppy, and my newfound humility and new respect for him made it difficult to express myself well at the time. But I told him something like I had realized that If I could only be as great as his little finger, I would be greater than my entire being, and I would be able to accomplish much more. I told you it wasn't a very good expression. Regardless of the lousy analogy, he understood my humility and took me back, and I began my real growth, and it happened fast. This time I wanted to change. I wanted to give. And I welcomed any chance to see myself so I could get better. Thus, this time, it was very easy in comparison. One day I was sitting in meditation in a room adjacent to where Zayn was eating and speaking to a small group of his elder monk students. I was already feeling elated in my meditation. My newfound humility had transformed something inside me, and all of a sudden, my kundalini shot up my spine and filled me with the light and love of God. While this was happening to me, Zayn got up from his meal, came up to me, touched the energy coming out of the top of my head, and gave me a new name. He will be called Peony L, which is now my eldest. I didn't bother asking at the time what it meant. I was too high from being full of bliss and spiritual energy to care. In fact, I never asked. It just came to me one day. Ironically, I later found out that the bigger the ego, the more powerfully one can manifest the universal spirit. Once that ego becomes a servant of the universal spirit. How appropriate. Now, do you want to have a hard time and protect your ego so others will think you are right all the time? Or do you want to have an easy time and be humble and become truly right all the time? Do you want others to think you're great? Or do you want to be great? You are free to choose, and you will live with the consequences of any choice you make. Well, I think I'm going to stop there and take a little break and put on some music, and I'll see you in just a few minutes.